And you might be wondering who is Pingu. He's not here this morning, but he said, Pastor, I just want to remain the mystery man. I'm not giving you my photo. So my challenge to you is find out who Pingu is. Pingu. Well, that's who you have to find out, who he is. Whether he remains a mystery or not is up to you. He will remain a mystery if you don't try and find out who he is. But I will tell you something. He's not here this morning yet, but he might arrive later on. But he wants to remain the mystery man, so that's his choice as well. Our next song as we stand to sing is not 697 but 107, still the same title, Day by Day. In Psalm 118 verse 24, this is the day which the Lord has made, let us rejoice and be glad in it, as we stand to sing Day by Day. Please be seated. If the boys and girls would like to make their way at the back for Sunday school, then please do so. The rest of us are going to turn to Habakkuk. Habakkuk chapter 2, and we'll be looking at verses 1 to 5. And I've called this God's waiting room, not the normal waiting, but often when I talk about God's waiting room, it's the weight of the burdens, the anxiety, and it has to do with waiting for an answer. And if we're honest today, I don't think there's anybody here that likes to wait very long for anything. We like to have everything instantaneously. We're not prepared to wait. We like to get things done, and often we want to finish what we start. Sometimes we just don't have enough time in a day to get what we want done. But in life, there are so many things that we have to wait for. And I guess I've learnt over the years that I used to get frustrated with having to wait. You know, when you go to a doctor's surgery, they say, look, be it here at this time, and you sit, and you wait, and you wait, and you wait, and you wait until the doctor is ready to see you. And you look at your watch and you think, that was supposed to be half an hour ago. What's happened? Why? What's gone wrong? We don't like to wait. Or if we're in traffic. Now up here in Darwin, our traffic jams don't last very long. But you go to Sydney, or Melbourne for that matter, and one car has an accident and you're hours before you get anywhere. We like everything to be instant, and there are many times in our journey through life when God says, if you like, wait, just wait. And that wait could be 15 minutes, that wait could be 15 years, that wait could be 50 years before we get an answer. And if we're honest, waiting is not part of our DNA. You and I, we want everything straight away. And of course, when we're in pain, we have to go to the doctor, we go to the hospital. And when you go to the accident emergency section of it, what do you do mostly? Wait, wait, and wait, and wait until the doctor sees you. And I think it's safe to say that the waiting room is one of the most dreaded places we face, because we don't do too well waiting, which is often the case when we're waiting upon God. What happens is God gives us a promise, but when it doesn't come to pass in our time frame, instead of waiting patiently, we try to speed up the process through our own manipulations. And when that fails to produce the desired results, we start the negotiation process, as I call it. Lord, if you do this for me, then I'll go to church. I might even read my Bible. And then we get to the age-old question, if God created the world in 6 days, why can't he take care of our problems very quickly? Why does God make us wait months, if not years, when he could do it immediately? The answer lies in this: he is God and we're not. If God is going to grow us up into what he's called us to be, then he must heal us of the things that we don't want to be healed of. And one of those things is our independence. Our independence. To do this, he places us in his waiting room. And in that waiting room, we learn patience. We receive the strength to face whatever lies ahead, which is something only he knows and is preparing us. Throughout the Bible, we see those who have great faith, who have gone through the very same process of getting the promise, trying to work it out in their own strength and ability, and then receiving the promises through waiting upon the Lord, just as Habakkuk is about to do. The wait experienced. I will stand like a guard to watch and place myself at the tower. I'll wait to see what he will say to me. I will wait to learn how God will answer my complaint. How many of you have prayed a prayer to God and you're still waiting? How long are you prepared to wait? How long are you prepared to wait? What's a reasonable time or expectation? Well, that's God's purpose, making us more like Jesus. And that to do that's going to take patience and a little bit of pain and suffering along the way. But so often when we come to God with prayers, we expect by the end of the day we're going to get our answer. And sometimes it doesn't happen when we want it. That doesn't mean God's not interested in us. He's just working something out. And the weight, the burden, if you like, of waiting weighs down heavily on us sometimes. When we get to the point when we say, God, why aren't you answering me? And Habakkuk had the same problem. God, why aren't you talking to me? Why aren't you answering my prayers? I've asked you a number of times and I'm still waiting. And what do? You remain silent. Now remember, Habakkuk had asked God what he was doing, why he wasn't getting involved, why he didn't answer his prayers. And of course, what happened was God did answer his prayer. And he said, Habakkuk, I'm going to use the Babylonians against you. How do you think that? What do you think of that? And of course, Habakkuk said, that's not fair. How could you use these pagans against people? They're worse than what we are. How could you do such a thing? He didn't think, you see, he thought God would respond this way. God would do things his way. And God says, no, I'm going to use the Babylonians. He didn't understand why God would do such a thing. He wasn't confused about what God was doing. He knew God would set him straight. And so he's waiting for an answer on the matter. Now, one thing that impresses me about Habakkuk, when it comes to his relationship with God, he didn't spit the dummy. He didn't spit the dummy. Often when God doesn't answer our prayers in the way that we want, we spit the dummy, we walk away and we said, if you're going to treat me like that, if you're going to act like that, if you're not going to answer my prayers, I want nothing to do with you. And so we walk away from God. But thankfully God doesn't walk away from us. He's patient with us. But Habakkuk didn't spit the dummy. He doesn't give up on God simply because God wouldn't tell him why he was doing what he was doing. He didn't reach that point in his life where he said, enough's enough. He says, I'm going to wait patiently for God to answer. I'm going to wait and see how God deals with all these things. It's as though he's thinking, I've been given some information, but I haven't been given a lot. So I'm going to wait upon the Lord. I'm going to trust the Lord. I'm going to see what God has to say before I do anything else. I'm going to watch. I'm going to act in faith on what he's already told me, and I'm going to wait and see what else he says. Our problem, like Habakkuk, is that when we don't get the answers from God, it's because we do not get them when we think we must have them. We expect God to answer us straight away. Take a lesson from Habakkuk. I'm going to stand here. I'm going to watch. I'm going to set myself on a tower. I'm going to wait until I see that answer. Now, the truth of the matter is most of us would rather do anything else in the world than wait. Some of us would rather do the wrong thing than wait. For most of us, as we grow older, we find life is waiting. We're always waiting for something. We don't always get what we want, when we want, how we want. And we've learnt, be patient. And particularly here in the territory, things seem to take a little longer than anywhere else in getting it. I'm amazed that if you live in the eastern states, you can post a letter one day and it's at the destination the next day. If you post a letter to get to the Northern Territory, how long does it take?
A week. I got my card. It took a week.
Well, sometimes it can take a week, sometimes it can take 3 weeks. We seem to be isolated, but the part is waiting. We've got to wait for so many things in life. We've got to wait for the bank to open. We've got to wait for the bank to give us a loan, if they agree. We've got to wait to start a family. We've got to wait when we're praying for loved ones to come to Christ. We've got to wait to find the right man or the right woman as our partner. We've got to wait to find out what God wants us to do. We've got to wait to buy a house. We've got to wait for prayers to be answered. It's one of the hardest things that we do in the Christian life is waiting for an answer. God makes us wait so that our faith will be put to the test. Habakkuk says, Lord, I'm going to wait on you if it takes forever. Now that's quite a statement, isn't it? How long are you prepared to wait on your God for an answer? Our next thought, oops, too quick. The writing expressed. And the Lord, he answered him. He said, write down the vision, write it clearly on clay tablets so that whoever reads it can run to tell others. God finally answers Habakkuk, but it wasn't the answer he was looking for. Now, understand something. God is God and we're not. And he often does things that make little or no sense to us in how he does it and the way he does it. We scratch our head and say, God, why did you do that? If it was me, I would have done it this way. Well, thankfully, God's not us and we're not God. As one commentator observed, in the Old Testament, God guided his people. How? Children of Israel, how did he guide them? How did they know where to follow and what to do? A cloud by day and a fiery pillar at night. That's what they did to follow God. Now sometimes, you can imagine, that cloud would move for days on end. It'd be here one day, it'd be over here the next day, here the next day. Then suddenly, without warning or explanation, that cloud would stop. It wouldn't go anywhere. And then it would move again. Then it would stop. There was no explanation given. The only command being, follow that cloud. Follow that pillar of fire. That's all they were told to do. No explanations, no detail of why or for how long. Just do it. Now, if I was one of those people following this cloud, maybe I was saying, why don't you stop and let us rest? Or if I'd been in the desert for several weeks, Lord, we've been here long enough. Can't we move on now? You know, we've been here a long time. Can't we move? And there are times in our Christian life when God's only command is one word: wait. Wait. No other explanation, no detail, just one word: wait. And when these moments come, God doesn't take time to explain himself. He doesn't make the picture clear. He doesn't say, well, Peter, this is what I want you to wait for. I'm working on doing this and this and this, and in about 10 days' time, you'll get your answer. Just trust me with it. But wait. He doesn't give me that detail. He just says simply, wait, I've got this. You've got to trust me. I've got this. God alone is sovereign. He chooses the times. He chooses the places in life. He sets the path for each one of his children, and he doesn't consult us and ask our opinion in advance if we're okay with what he's doing. He doesn't do that. Habakkuk got his answer because he was prepared to wait on the Lord. He remained watchful and alert to see what else God was going to do. Now, in ancient times, the city appointed watchmen situated on the city walls. Their job: scan the horizon, warn the city of approaching danger, prepare themselves for what is coming. Now, if that watchman was slack, didn't take their responsibility seriously, then the city paid the price for their slackness. And the blood of the people who died because of their slackness was on their hands. So you can imagine the tremendous responsibility that those watchmen had to deal with. Imagine the tension as they waited and scanned the horizon for any danger. Now, if you've worked in the security industry, any part, if you like, of watching people's property, in the wee small hours, it's very hard to be alert and keep on doing it. And you can do that day in and day out, and nothing ever changes. It seems to be the same. But one day, when you least expect it, there'll be something that changes. And so the watchmen had to be prepared and be alert for those changes. God's answer to Habakkuk was in the form of a vision. And he says, Habakkuk, write down these things on clay tablets. The message was to be written down, and it was to be preserved and proclaimed for all the inhabitants of the city. It was also to be a record for people to read in the future. And that vision was about future judgment that was to come. In other words, we can read it now. We can pick it up and we can read it, and we can see how God dealt with his people, how God dealt with his prophet Habakkuk. But it was also a message of encouragement to Israel as a nation and as God's chosen people, affirming for them the promise of God that a faithful remnant of the people would be saved from their pagan masters, the Babylonians, who God had chosen to be his instrument of judgment. What was God's purpose in letting them know? He's letting them know, I'm still God. I'm still in control. I've got this. He was orchestrating everything that was happening. And it was happening according to his purposes and plans. God moves in mysterious ways. His wonders to perform is something that you often hear. But God doesn't tell us how or why or when. He just does it. And he says that we're to trust him. The waiting endured. It is not yet time for the message to come true, but that time is coming soon. The message will come true. It may seem like a long time, but be patient and wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not be delayed. Now, we all reach a point where we're willing to wait for a little while. But here, God tells Habakkuk there's an appointed time for this message about judgment. And that message about judgment, that judgment wasn't coming straight away. But he's affirming for Habakkuk, don't make the mistake that judgment wasn't coming. I've appointed a day when it's going to happen. I know that day. You don't. And he's saying to Habakkuk, don't be put off when you don't see it happen right away. You'll have to trust me on this. Judgment will come. It will not be delayed. You have to patiently wait for it. And that's the problem we have. We all have our agendas. We all have our timetables. But God doesn't work to our schedules or timetables. He doesn't say, oh look, I better make an appointment with you today and discuss with you your future plans. He doesn't do that. They're in his times and hands, and he's working out the details, and everything's going ahead according to his plans. So the people in Judah who had this message would have a comfort. Even though they're about to experience this pagan invasion, they would be taken in captivity for over 70 years. And what they understood was that God was going to make their pagan masters, these Babylonians, they were not going to get away scot-free. They were going to pay the price in judgment themselves, because God had set a day aside for it, and it was going to happen. Habakkuk had his problems understanding God and the way he worked, but he was prepared to be patient, see what God was going to do. And sometimes I think you and I, we suffer impatience because God doesn't answer us the way we want. Sometimes we have come to a place where we've put God in his box. And when we want God, we take him out of the box, and then we expect God to answer according to the way that we've worked out how things should happen. God, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this. And when it doesn't work out, we become frustrated. We become angry that God didn't answer our prayers, or he didn't do it this way when he should have done it and we thought he should have done it. God says, I've got this. I've got this. Sometimes we're impatient because we can't see God's hand at work. We think he's silent. He's not doing the job that he should do as God. So we begin to have our doubts about him. Habakkuk didn't want to hear God's response when he said, I'm going to use these Babylonians. That's not what he wanted to hear. He thought God would give him a slap over the wrist, punish him a little bit, and then things would be back to normal. But God says, no, I've got this. You and I need to learn the art of patience. It's hard, but it brings rewards to those who exercise it. You know, when you wait for something, it's more you're glad when you finally do get it. But as you get older, you've learned to be patient. Well, at least you start to learn patience. You're prepared to wait things. You know, there's always things that will happen, but you've learnt to wait during those things, and you leave those matters in God's hands. God will reward our patience, never early, never late, but always on time. Always on time. Sitting in God's waiting room carries a lot of pressure. It takes a lot of waiting, a burden that often weighs us heavily, just to let God do each thing while we wait. And God's message to Habakkuk, I'm going to judge these Babylonians. I've appointed a day for it. The same way that Israel was judged, they too will be judged. They'll not get away with what they've done. Even though I use them to bring justice to my people, they too will pay for their sins. Habakkuk isn't so much worried of whether God will judge them or not. It's a question, when are you going to do it? When are you going to judge them? Think about the number of times that you and I have prayed to God for something significant to happen, and it seems to take forever for anything to happen. You must wait and wait and wait some more. And often you'll wait to that point where you say, enough's enough. And you'll say, God, where are you? I'm sick and tired of praying to you and you never seem to answer, or you seem to take your sweet time to get back to me. So why should I trust you? It's as though you don't care. I need your help. I need an answer. Is it that you're just too busy doing something else to care about what I want? Or you're just not going to answer me and I'm still waiting? Or, God, you did answer me, but you know what? I don't like what you said. I don't like your response. I don't accept it. Why do you do things that way? Why can't you just give me an answer right away? I can handle it. You know, the answer is we can't handle it. We can't handle it. Why? Because when we don't get what we want in the way we want, we just do more complaining. It's not right, God. I asked you to answer me straight away. You took your own sweet time, and I'm just fed up with it. You should answer me straight away when I want. And of course, when he does, we complain even more. Why did it take you so long? You see, God answers our prayers in his own way, in his own time. And he does so he is the one that gets the glory for it. What do I mean? If we ask God for something to happen and he does it right away, you and I tend to take the credit for it because we prayed for it to happen. And it worked out exactly the way that we thought it was, and it worked out exactly what we asked for. We take the glory and God doesn't get it. God is saying to Habakkuk, not today, not tomorrow, but the answer is on the way, so just wait for it. Wait for it. The Babylonians will be judged, and in the end, they'll be destroyed. God will balance the scales of justice, but he's not working on our timetable. He might appear to delay, he might even appear to hesitate. But remember that the next time you feel like giving up when you pray, don't. God's got a handle on it. Our next verse, the wisdom extorted, the evil nation is very proud of itself. It's not living as it should, but those who are right with God will live by faith. This is where the Protestant Reformation was based on it. The just shall live by faith and faith alone. And this verse makes a contrast between people who choose to live life doing what they want with those who choose to live their life to please God. The Babylonians typified people who were puffed up and full of themselves. They pursued life with reckless abandonment, allowing their desires and appetites to give them whatever they want without worrying about any consequences, even though they knew better. These people are on the path to destruction. Their pride and arrogance makes it a no-brainer they'll come under the wrath of God for their choices. In contrast, God says the righteous will live by faith. That means having their confidence fully in God. They'll demonstrate this with a commitment to doing what God wants, with right thinking and right actions in a consistent and dependable way. It's more than talk. It includes the right walk to back up what we say. You know, we're good as people telling others what to do, but we're not so good at putting it into practice. But those who live by faith and live the life right, their walk and talk will be consistent with who they are. The righteous person is one who has confidence in God. He remains faithful to him and is determined to live out that faith daily. Now this is the key to Habakkuk. The just shall live by faith. How does that work out for you as a believer when you can't make sense of what is happening to you or around you? When life is full of questions, full of uncertainties, where is your faith? Where is your God to help you weather the storms of life that come and go? You see, as a Christian, I'm to walk by faith and not by sight. But I struggle to make it work. And here I want us to see there is a definite contrast between truth and a perception. What we know and believe to be true and what we perceive to be true. So often as Christians we follow our perceptions of what we think is true rather than what we know to be true by faith. When we place our faith in Christ alone for our salvation, he takes our sins and places it on Jesus Christ as our substitute. He replaces our sin with the righteousness of his Son, Jesus Christ. The problem for many Christians is the struggle with having or believing the biblical account of what I've just said, because it doesn't seem to match up with our perception of the reality of everyday life. Sure, you can say, I believe Jesus was a real person. I believe that he died on a cross. But I cannot see how he makes a person righteous before God. I struggle to understand how Jesus could pay the price for my sins. I lack the faith to believe what he's done for me. My perception of what he has done doesn't measure up to the reality of the biblical truth. So my life doesn't match up with what I say I believe. And it's easy to say I believe these things, but in everyday living, I struggle with putting my faith and trust in this very same God who paid the price for my sins. The talk is cheap. It's the talk and the walk that make the difference. What I believe determines how I will live my life. And if I live my life on a faulty foundation, then people are going to see it. It's going to crumble when the storms of life come. I need to understand my foundation. I need to build my life on the truth of that foundation. And one blogger I found, she shares some struggles that she had, and I think they resonate with all of us as Christians. And she summarizes this thought: trying to live a life of faith. She says the first thing she struggled with was that faith means handing over control. Sounds so simple, doesn't it? But the actual reality is you and I like to be in control of our lives. We like to know what we're doing, when we're doing it, how we're doing it, why we're doing it. We like to plan life out. We like to know what we're going to do. And faith says, no, I'm prepared to hand over my life to God, and I'm allowing Him to have His way in it. This is where faith steps in and works. Because we structure our lives to the point that we feel we're in control. I've got this. I've got option A, B, or C if this happens. But you know, we organise, we plan, we make lists, we watch for potential obstacles and work to stop them before they happen. But the sense of being in control of our lives is really just an illusion. Circumstances occur and will occur in our life that we have no control over. Now, some remembered, was it 2 weeks ago, being rumbled in your bed in the early hours of the morning? And as I said to Joyce, stop moving in the bed. It wasn't her at all. She said, it wasn't me. And then the shaking still continued. I had no control over it. I couldn't say, stop, don't happen. It was out of my control. And there are things in our life that will happen, that we have no control. And so when you have no control, you feel as though your life's in a tailspin because you've lost control. When as a Christian, you're in a perfect position to tap into faith and trust God for the outcome. I don't know why it happened, but He does. And He's working out all things for my good. That's what He promises. So am I going to trust Him? Am I going to allow Him to have control, or do I want control of my life? Living by faith, this idea of control, it's very hard. We struggle with it every day. Faith also requires trusting the invisible. You know, trusting the invisible. A God who you cannot see. Now, most people are doers. They have to do something. When there's a problem, when there's a circumstance, they can't sit and wait. They have to take things into their own hands, fix and change. And we're like that. We like to feel that we're making progress. But sometimes all we do is expend energy. It doesn't work. Doubt is the biggest deterrent to faith. Yet doubting is inherent in believing what you can't see. Fear joins forces with doubt, saying, this can't be resolved. There is no hope. Yet faith says hope exists. This is a way through it. God is walking with us. So there's control, there's trusting the invisible. Faith requires seeing things through spiritual eyes. Now, how many here have got 20/20 vision? Eh? You see, as you get older, there's things happen to your eyes. I've got to wear glasses now. have done for a while. But I've had to have cataract surgery as well because my eyes were dim and I could not see. Now I've brought my specs with me. But you see, when we've got 20/20 vision, we can see things clearly. We really can. And we take our eyesight for granted until you experience some problems with what you see. Yet many have a vision problem they don't even recognize, and it's called spiritual blindness. The spiritually blind don't see their own shortcomings, and they don't see their need for faith. They trust in only what they can see and rely on others or themselves to make things happen. That's not walking by faith. That's walking by what they can see and the things they can do. The other thing she said, faith requires living in current circumstances without knowing the ultimate outcome. You know, how much do we trust other people? How much do we trust them? It depends on who they are, really. If I said to you, trust me, I'll look after you, would you? If you don't know me, why on earth would you trust me to look after you? You don't know a thing about me. I could murder you in your sleep. Would you still trust me? You know, we experience situations where we must trust someone else to diagnose and come up with a solution. You know, sometimes when we have an illness and we go to the doctor and he said, you've got cancer, you've got this, and you say, what are my options? He says, well, there's surgery, there's all these things, but what he's asking us to do is trust us, trust somebody else with your life. And we have to place our faith, we have to place our life in somebody else's hands. And sometimes when we do trust somebody, they let us down. They fail to deliver what they promised, or they don't meet our expectations. And sometimes in life it feels as though God has let us down because he doesn't answer our prayers in the time frame and the way we want. He just doesn't do it. And so as a result, many people struggle with their faith and get to the point where no more. God doesn't answer my prayer, God doesn't care, so I'm walking away. You know, learning to trust takes practice. Every day we learn to trust the Lord more, and that faith grows as we grow with him. The last thing she mentioned is faith requires patience, and this other one, perseverance. They seem to go hand in hand, don't they? It requires patience, it requires perseverance. Patience denies the desire to have answers right away, to make things happen fast, to our liking. Perseverance marches on despite discouragement and difficulty. Yet our faith requires both patience and perseverance to overcome doubt as we wait for God to answer. Walking by faith is a struggle, but it comes down to the truth. What do I really believe about the God of the Bible? Is he really who he says he is? Can he do what he says he can? Am I showing the people that I live and work with by my life that I really have a God who changes people's lives? I have an awesome God. Do they see that in the way that I live my life and the way that I talk about him? Or do they see I'm just the same as them, struggling with my problems, and they can't see any difference that this God who I say I follow and I believe makes in my life? What sort of a God do we have? In verse 5, the warning explained, just as wine can trick a person, those who are too proud will not last, because the desire is like a grave's desire for death, and like death, they always want more. They gather other nations for themselves and collect for themselves all the countries. God provides Habakkuk with some more information to encourage him to live by faith, that the Babylonians weren't going to get away with what they were doing, even though God had chosen them. There's an appointed day of judgment coming. And our text introduces the illustration of wine and the known effects it has on a person who allows that wine to control them. Now, what I found interesting, the ancient writers tell us that the Babylonians were addicted to wine. Did you know that? The Babylonians were addicted to wine. And like its effect on them, it's intoxicating and it's deceptive. Wine deceives a person into thinking they are more important than what they really are. Now, does that ring true with the Babylonians? Who can stand against us? We'll just bulldoze you and take what we want anyway. Might was right as far as they were concerned. But they thought there was nobody, absolutely nobody, who could stop them. And so what it's saying is, wine confuses and twists a person's perception of truth with lies and exaggerations. The Babylonians thought themselves invincible. Nobody had the power to stand against them. And they allowed themselves to be intoxicated by their conquests and deeds. But this in itself would bring their downfall. Filled with pride, drunk with wine, the Babylonians are thirsty for conquest. They cannot rest. Their proud, restless nature stirs them up until they become greedy as the grave. Just as death and the grave are not satisfied, never say enough until all come into its clutches, so the Babylonians sought to take captive all the nations and peoples. And so it's giving us a picture of a nation who thought itself self-dependent, self-reliant, didn't need anybody else, could take what they want without any repercussions. Now it's interesting. We have the privilege of looking back in history and seeing the demise of the Babylonian Empire. And how was the Babylonian Empire overthrown by the Medes and the Persians? How was it possible? One of the biggest, cruelest and fiercest people ever were able to be taken like they were. What was wrong? Well, see, Daniel 5 tells us the information. Because they were overthrown when they were doing what? Partying. When they were drunken and in a stupor, they were not prepared for the Medes and Persians who came in and took them by surprise. In other words, they were drunk. Their king Belshazzar and his leaders were having a banquet, and a hand appeared warning them that judgment was coming. It was writing on the wall. And it told them straight away, hey, look, as I read it to you in Daniel 5, it says this, O King, the Most High God, made your father Nebuchadnezzar a great, important and powerful king because God made him important. All the people, nations and those who spoke every language were very frightened of Nebuchadnezzar. If he wanted someone to die, he killed that person. If he wanted someone to live, he let that person live. Those he wanted to promote, he promoted. Those he wanted to be less important, he made less important. But Nebuchadnezzar became too proud and stubborn, so was taken off his royal throne. His glory was taken away. He was forced away from people, and his mind became like the mind of an animal. He lived with the wild donkeys, was fed grass like an ox, became wet with dew. These things happened to him until he learned his lesson. The Most High God rules over every kingdom on earth, and he sets everyone he chooses over those kingdoms. Belshazzar, you already knew these things because you're a descendant of Nebuchadnezzar. Still, you have not been sorry for what you have done. God keeps his words. He keeps his promises. And Babylon was judged. It was found wanting, just as God told Habakkuk it would happen. Not right away, but it would happen on the appointed day that it would. Now, the question we always ask ourselves is, why do the wicked prosper and good people suffer? Why do they prosper? And we need to understand judgment is coming. And it might appear that the wicked have got away with it. For 70 odd years, Babylon got away with it. But they ultimately paid the price. God had set a time and a place for judgment to happen. And God will hold the wicked accountable. Now, you and I, over a period of time, we might forget what was done when it was done. But God has no such problem. He holds accountable and he doesn't miss a thing. If I put all this together this morning, it's not easy finding yourself in God's waiting room. It's a place, if we're honest, we don't want to spend much time in. It really isn't. We're always in a hurry. We always want answers right away. And yet that waiting room, God's waiting room, gives us time to reflect on many things that are happening in our lives that you and I would not normally stop and consider or even pay attention to. In God's waiting room, we've got the time to wait, the time to examine. And this pulls us up short. We don't like to not be in control of our lives or the things happening to us. And it's hard to have the confidence to give that control and put it in somebody else's hand when we can't do it. Now, by nature, we're proud people. We don't like asking for help. Our pride says, no, I can do this. I've got this. I'll take care of it. No, I don't need help. But the reality is we do need help. And we need to learn to be patient and ask for it. Because it challenges us when we're in God's waiting room in life. We're waiting for the doctor to see us. And this challenges us. Who is my God? Who really is your God this morning? And what can he do? We say there's nothing that my God cannot do. But in everyday life, is that a reality? Do I put restrictions upon him and say, oh, God can't do that. God won't be able to do that. I better do something. Why do I need God? What does he expect of me? Or does my life reflect that I live by faith or that I live by the things that I see? And this is the weight that we struggle with, just as Habakkuk did in God's waiting room. He was waiting for an answer, and God gave it to him. But it wasn't what he wanted to hear. But he was going to patiently wait and see how God worked it out. How would God honour his promises that he made to his people? And he found that God did. Many of us are in God's waiting room, and we're still waiting, still asking, still seeking. When are you going to answer God? Or maybe, like Habakkuk, we don't like the answer. We don't like the way that God works. So we spit the dummy. We chuck a wobbly with God. And we tell him, I don't like you, God. I don't like the way you did that. I don't like the way that you're doing things. You're not doing your job. You promised to do this, this, and this. And hey, you didn't do it. He does, Karen. But the challenge is, who is your God?